Okay, we're going to go straight into the next session, and frankly, it's from one incredible story to the next, and this one really is incredible. It's Investigators Gone Bad, the incredible story of Cullen Johnson and Elaine White, who were basically a couple, I think they were both Canadians, who set up shop, certainly initially in the Bahamas, and as private investigators, and they were fabricating bank records and claiming they had some sort of special access to bank records, and they could help clients locate and recover assets. And it was ultimately discovered all to have been a fraud. And presenting the session is somebody who had some dealings with them, Ed Davis. And I think a couple of their representatives once attended the offshore conference a few years ago, and I actually think that might be how Ed, that was the genesis of Ed becoming involved with this group. So I apologize for that, Ed.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Not your fault. But you won't. First of all, the first, I think, interesting fact is that we have Canadian criminals, which is a very rare thing. So I think we should stop and talk about that for just a second. Do you have my slides? Oh, good. You have my slides up. Great. So let me first say that I'm supposed to have a co-presenter. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to see this many people here at this late in the second day. That's great. This is an interesting story and well worth sticking around for, because every one of us, whether you be an investigator or a lawyer who uses investigators or a client that uses investigators, this story, it could happen to anyone in this room. I'll tell you right now. And I'm supposed to have a co-presenter named Nicole Bokra-Gray. Unfortunately, due to an illness in her family that just occurred on Friday, she will not be able to come. So I'm going to cover her portion as well. But I'm going to get right into the story of Cullen Johnson and Elaine White. But my part of the story starts after they originally went over to the dark side. Cullen Johnson was a Toronto Metro cop for, I think, 9 years. His wife was an in-house investigator. One of her former employers is here. Our boss is here. So she could probably, in the question period, tell us a little bit about her as well. But let me walk you through who the folks are how the story started. I was here at OffshoreAlert maybe 4 years ago, and I was approached by a gentleman from Seattle, Washington, I won't name him, but he was with a company called the American Justice Institute. And that sounded phony right off the bat. They met with us. They said they represented 90-odd investors in a thing called the Advanced Health Scan. There really was an advanced health scan Ponzi scheme. That really happened. There really was a bankruptcy case in California. There really were victims. We met a lot of these victims, and ultimately what convinced me to get involved was the fact that I met some of these victims and felt compelled to help them in any way that we could. My firm ultimately made nothing off of this case at all. We incurred costs and headaches along the way, just to be clear about that. But we tried to help in any way that we could. And when we first got to the case, it was about our friend Daniel Alfred Caterino. That's his mugshot, by the way. He was in Alabama in prison for an entirely unrelated crime, and then U.S. postal inspectors were putting the case together again regarding advanced health scan, and ultimately, the day he was released from Alabama prison, he was rearrested, and now is working through the process of being reconvicted on this second crime. So Caterino, in a way, is not important to this story. But I want to tell you a little bit about it because it was a real Ponzi scheme. And when you approach these cases as a professional, you're obviously trying to sift through what are the real facts here, and what is the BS or what is just client mythology that's been attached to the case, because sometimes clients and victims create their own mythology as the case goes on. So we find out that Caterino is the bad guy. We are meeting with these folks, and they said, but good news, the work's almost done, because the clients and the American Justice Institute have already retained other investigators who've located the bank accounts where Caterino stashed the money. And we were talking about chasing roughly $15.5 million, which is not, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of money. It's a lot of money to these investors, though. Each of these sort of mom and pop investors were in for $200,000, $300,000, or $80,000. There were one or two in for over $1 million, but most of them had put a significant portion of their life savings into this Ponzi scheme. So for them, it was obviously $15.5 million was a lot of money. And so and the people, they wouldn't tell us the names of the investigators at first. They said they're known as the agency. And I said, I'm going to use a legal term now, bullshit. They did not, nobody calls themselves the agency. And they said, no, that's their name. They call themselves the agency. And I said, well, look, we don't work with investigators that we don't know. We've kissed a lot of frogs along the way, and most of them haven't turned into princes. And so we would rather stick with our frogs than use yours. And they said, no, we've already paid these people $80,000. We've got a lot invested in them, and they found the money. So that's how it started. And let me just move on to the first fraud. I want to give you the background on that. The first fraud is really the background, but it's important to know that Caterino solicited folks to put these supposedly super scanners into California clinics. There was one clinic built. That was sort of the showcase that he used to rope everybody else in. The idea was that this was cutting edge and it was going to be used to help diagnose the potentiality for heart attacks, and that it was going to do really well. The investors were deemed limited partners. They were promised 10% annual returns. First red flag. You're promised any sort of actual defined term return, including something as high as 10%. The clinic itself, though, never actually saw a patient. It was there, but it never opened. Ultimately, Caterino was, as I said, imprisoned for separate state securities violations in Alabama. So he had to go to prison in Alabama, which is in and of itself a pretty significant punishment, because it's not one of our more advanced states in the United States, as some of you know. It led to an investigation into AHS by the United States Postal Inspection Service. I will say this, over the years, I've been doing this for 28 years, and some of the very, very best investigators I've ever worked with out of the government, either former government or even in government where we've collaborated with government investigators, have come out of the Postal Inspector's Office. They're fantastic, just fantastic. So not to denigrate any other investigators, but I'm just telling you that they're a rare breed within the U.S. government. They are very good, top to bottom. So that investigation into AHS led to discovered over 1,700 partnership units issued to 279 investors. $8.5 million was taken in the first round. There was a second round that led to the 15.5. He utilized numerous sham entities to launder the money and take it offshore. He really did do that. He really did take money offshore. He allegedly funneled the money ultimately to Jersey and Monaco. So when we first get on the scene, we're told, and we have our first conference call, and we said, look, we will talk to these people just out of courtesy to you, but we do not want to work with them at all. And they said, well, look, it's our $80,000. If you want to work on the case, then you're going to have to at least give them a shot. So we did a conference call with them, and the first thing off the bat, they said, well, we've got some bad news. Good news, bad news. The money in Jersey is still there, but the money that was formerly in Switzerland moved to Monaco. And I said, how do you know that? What evidence are you looking at? We can't tell you that. We can't tell you any of that. That's going to be information that we're not going to be able to share. And we got into a row right on the phone. That first meeting, I will tell you, also raised a red flag because of the somewhat combative nature. We then had a second conference call in which the clients said, look, I really want you to try to work with these people. So we had a call. They called into a conference line, the two people that we dealt with, and I guess I skipped on the last slide their nicknames. They went by, Cullen Johnson went by the moniker DP, and Elaine White went by the moniker Moneypenny or MP. She said at one point, well, MP means Moneypenny, as I guess from the James Bond movies. I don't know. So we start off with this first piece of information that the money has already moved. And this is very typical when you're trying to reload on a victim, that you're always chasing, you're always one step behind the money. And then you just keep bilking them out of another payment. And they were having the little committee that dealt, and they would get the money in from all the investors. And the person we dealt with was a guy named Dave Pendel, a really, really nice guy, a businessman out of Michigan that sort of ended up being the leader for the victims group. So that led to a second call. The second call was very contentious. And they called into a conference number at my office. First of all, the call dropped by mistake. And they called back in. And when they called back in, their number popped on my screen. And it was a Bahamas number. So I wrote it down. I saw the number, and I was there with an associate in my firm, and I said, this is interesting that we got this number from, they're in the Bahamas. Now we know they're at least calling from a phone that's registered in the Bahamas. And it got contentious, and I said, look, guys, if this is false, I'm going to dedicate my career to going after you. And Cullen Johnson said, I'm not afraid of your Dago threats. And I thought, how does he know I'm half Italian? He doesn't even know that. My name's Edward Davis. This guy had gone and checked me out and done some research on me. But he called me, he said, I'm not afraid of your Dago threats. I said, it's not a threat. I'm not insulted that you call me a Dago. I take it as a badge of honor. But at the end of the day, he was very, very contentious. And I said, look, it's not a threat. I'm telling you for a fact, if you are leading these people on, you're going to pay for it. I won't rest. And another lawyer in this room also represented a group of victims dealing with them, and I'm sure he'll talk about it when we get to the question period, which I hope I leave us enough time to talk about. So very contentious. They used block phone numbers, but we got that one break. They refused to provide real names. They kept moving the money. Ultimately, the client said, what if they pass an integrity test? I said, I don't know what that means. How do you test the integrity of an investigator that says they can find offshore bank accounts? They said, well, one of the investors said, I have a bank account in Montreal. Nobody knows about it, and I will put some money in it, and then we'll see if they can find it. And if they find it, that will prove they know what they're doing. Well, unbeknownst to me, they had interviewed this guy, and they knew a lot about him, and they knew, including the fact that he had said slipped in the interview with this victim, and so they were able to find it, and they did report accurately that the account had $10.03 in it. That was in fact true. It was $10.03. So the victims were, look, this is proven, these guys know what they're doing, and you really need to use them. And I again said, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go forward. So I said, and a year later, at this meeting, at this hotel, right over there in the corner, I took a conference call with these people, and I said, look, we're not doing anything unless you provide actual evidence, not innuendo, not intelligence, but actual evidence from the banks of bank accounts at the banks in the name of Katerina. And they said, fine, we'll do that. So we got, a week later, I guess I skipped a slide, but I'll come back to that. We got these. Now, it's hard to tell here, but when you actually had these in your hands, if someone who's looked at thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of pages of bank account statements, you know when you're holding a fake bank account statement in your hands. You just know it. And these were completely fake. They were actually quite juvenile. They went online and captured things. I said to the client, we can't go anywhere with this. This is not evidence of anything. I'm very concerned that we would be working a fraud on the court. The client said, well, we really want to go forward. We very much want to see, just test it. We'll put some money into it. We'll throw a couple thousand, maybe $10,000 into the kitty to see if we can at least get a lawyer in each of the jurisdictions to find out if this is legitimate information. So let's see where I'm at. So what we did was we hired a lawyer. One of the lawyers from that firm is here in this audience in Jersey to go meet. In Jersey, we were able to go to the police department and ask them if they could check with the bank off the record, very quietly, to see if the bank actually had an account in this name, because it would have been money laundering, and we were essentially filing an informal money laundering report. In Monaco, we actually had to file a lawsuit. We had to file a claim with the court and post a small bond in order to launch the action to test this information. And in both cases, very quickly, we got back, not only is this not true, but the actual nomenclature for the bank isn't right. None of the account numbers match what the banks use in those countries. It is absolutely false. So what do you think the investors did at that point? They said, well, it's just a mistake. I'm sure it's a little mistake. We really think this, we got to keep using these guys. I said, you now have all the evidence that you need to determine that. And now by this time, they've paid $100,000 to these folks. The emails are numerous, telling them not to do it. It's a bad idea. We should start over and get the right investigators, because Caterino, in fact, did steal money from them. And he did, we believe, take some of it and secrete it. So we wanted to go find that money. But the problem with sometimes dealing with the mentality of a victim is they very much want to believe it. They want to believe that they're on the trail, they're engaged, they want to find some sort of redemption they feel bad that they were duped in the first place. And so you really have to work and deal with that with a victim. I always believe, and having dealt with victims, that they go through 4 steps. They first go through the disbelief step. It's not possible, there's got to be an alternative explanation, and then it's the self-blame step, I'm an idiot, I can't believe I did this, and then it's the anger step, which is I want their heads on a platter, and then it's the 4th step, which is resolution. And our job, I think, as professionals, is to get them to that 4th step as quickly as we can so they can make rational, intelligent decisions, which is, many times difficult. So anyway, I determined at that point that I was going to live up to my promise, that I was going to not rest until these people were arrested and prosecuted for what they did to these folks. I told them I'm not doing any more for them. Now it's personal, and we're going to go after these folks. Chris Redmond and I belong to a group called FraudNet, ICC FraudNet, and we were sitting at a table at a conference, and one of our colleagues is Canadian, and it's actually Martin Kenney, who lives in the BVI now, and we were starting to tell the story, and Chris said, I know I have the same story, same people. And Martin said, I know those people. They were arrested in Toronto. It's Cullen Johnson and Elaine White. So we both started doing our own research, and Chris will correct me if I'm remembering it wrong. And ultimately, I submitted affidavits. My client submitted affidavits with U.S. Postal inspectors. They launched a criminal investigation. They asked for their extradition from the Bahamas. They fled to the Turks and Caicos islands, and then ultimately were extradited back to the United States, to the Eastern District of Virginia. And let's stop for a minute and talk about how this could happen and how it can go on so long. Cullen Johnson and Elaine White defrauded probably half a dozen or more Canadians in promising that they could do sweeps of offshore bank accounts and find this information and give it to them to help them recover their assets. And they would literally monitor the newspapers and go look for contentious divorces or cases in which money has appeared to have gone missing, and they would approach those people and say, we can help you. So many times they dealt directly with the victims without a lawyer or other professional or accountant or law enforcement between them and the victim. So they went directly in, and they went in for the kill. And they were doing what is known in the business as reloading on these victims. They ultimately moved and fled after they were arrested in Toronto. They were on bail, and they fled offshore, and they restarted their business, turns out, in the Bahamas, and they were selling these services to other investigators. So there's 3 possible, or maybe more, 3 possible sources of clients for them. There are the victims themselves. There are other investigators, which in this case, there was another investigator, the American Justice Institute, which I have no reason to believe that guy was involved. And so I want to be clear about that. I have my suspicions, my doubts, but I don't have any tangible evidence that he was actually involved. I think he was just as duped as everyone else was. And I at least hope so. I hope he was duped as much as everyone else was. Then you've got the lawyers that use these services, and I guess maybe even a 4th would be those others who are looking for this information, and accountants and others who are leading the charge, whether as insolvency practitioners or otherwise. So any one of us could fall prey to this claim that they can generate information from bank accounts offshore. I think anyone who makes the claim that they can get you that kind of information has to be dealt with a high degree of skepticism. That's not to say there aren't people that can get that kind of information. But the first question you have to ask is, can they get it legally? The second question is, can they get it in a way that you can use it? Because knowing that the money's there and not being able to do anything about it is worse than not knowing at all, I think, in some ways, because you're kind of stuck and you can't do anything about it. And I think there are probably people in this room that have been in that situation. So they get extradited to the Eastern District of Virginia, and this Dago filed an affidavit, as I said, against them, as did many others. And ultimately they were arrested and pled guilty. So they're extradited. They pled guilty to 1 count of money laundering conspiracy each. And I got to read you something from an article about the sentencing. When they got to the sentencing, Johnson, almost his prior plea, I don't know if you've ever been to a guilty plea, but when you go to a guilty plea, the judge does something called an allocution, and he asks or she asks the accused of certain questions, and they need to basically allocute to the facts that give rise to the guilty plea, right? And so they're standing there and they do. Well, Cullen Johnson starts to backpedal in the middle of his allocution, and he says that he was not standing, I'm going to quote from a newspaper article, Johnson's prior plea nearly unraveled at the beginning of the day when it seemed that Johnson was not standing by his admission of guilt. He sent a 27-page letter to Davis on Wednesday, the day before the sentencing, saying that he should have been more diligent in looking into what his wife was doing with the business. Davis voiced concern about the letter, asking Johnson if he was backing off his statement of the September guilty plea hearing and that he, quote, well knew, close quote, about the fraud as it was occurring, which is, I can tell you from personal experience, the guy was on the phone call, knew exactly what was going on. Johnson didn't give a straight answer, surprisingly, saying he realized, quote, only from hindsight that the documents were fraudulent and that he takes responsibility for the harm that I caused. I'm not trying to throw the train off the track here. That wasn't good enough for Davis, which is the name of the federal judge in Virginia, who ultimately took a recess for Johnson to talk to his lawyer. Later, Davis again asked Johnson if he knew about the fraud, which could include willful blindness. The short answer is yes, Johnson said. When Davis asked him for the long answer, Johnson replied, the short answer is fine. Davis then accepted the guilty plea and moved on to sentencing. He then again later said that he wished he had paid more attention to what his wife was doing. So he rolled on his wife to some degree. And I think when we get to the sentencing, you'll see that he got a better deal than she got in sentencing by rolling on his wife. And I'm not even sure they're actually married. Cheryl, do you know if they're married or if they're just... As far as I know. Okay, all right. So you just love the fact that this guy rolls on his wife at sentencing. It really shows you what they're all about. But there's another set of culprits that emerged. The other culprits were a Greek-American named Terry Grontis. And this is a lovely picture of Terry and the news anchor for WTKR News, Channel 3 in Virginia. I think it's Roanoke, Virginia, but in Virginia. And she was the boyfriend of Grontis. And they laundered about $1 million through Bickford's account. Grontis used her account to launder the money through it. And then some of it went back to White and Johnson. And the rest of it, Grontis and Bickford spent on luxury items. So what happens is there are warrants issued for Grontis and Bickford. Bickford ultimately is arrested, resigns her job as a news anchor, and Grontis flees to Greece and becomes a Greek citizen, and extradition is denied for him by the Greek government. So Grontis is free and clear, and Bickford is now a convicted, she's pled to 1 count of filing a false tax return. And we have some of the IRS folks here too, so maybe they had some role in this case. I'd love to hear if they did. So they were both sentenced to 5.5 years in federal prison, which means they'll probably do a little over 3. Generally, the rule is in a federal prison 85%, but for whatever reason, if you look at their release dates, and I'll get to that in a second, Cullen Johnson got a much better deal, and it may have been there were some post-judgment motions that were filed. Juliet Bickford pled guilty, as I said. Grontis is a fugitive. I get these wonderful notices from the Department of Justice because I'm classified as a victim now. So I get these since I filed an affidavit telling me what prison they're at, where what their release dates are, if it's been adjusted, what their sentencing was. This was in particular to tell us that he had been sentenced. And if you look here at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but he was ultimately incarcerated for 3 years and 10 months. So his release date is coming up November of this year. And Juliet Bickford, she got 1 year probation for filing a false tax return. And our friend Elaine, she has a January 2018 release date from prison. So she ended up getting a much longer prison sentence than her husband, most likely because to some degree he rolled on her. So the story, there are some lessons to be learned. Now these were put together by these points by my co-presenter who's not here, so I'll walk through them. I have my own thoughts on what lessons there are. The first one is you need to trust your instincts. Usually your gut is going to tell you what to do, and you should be really hesitant to go against your gut in these situations. We all get, as you heard the last speaker, people get zealous in the pursuit of the bad guys, and they want to help the victims, and certainly I did and others did, and these victims were zealous. We were very skeptical all along. At no point did we ever tell them to rely on this information, even though we ultimately filed an action in Monaco. We made full and complete disclosure to the law firm in Monaco and to the law firm in Jersey that this was dubious, dodgy information. We did not trust these people. We had advised the clients not to do it, but they were willing to take the risk of losing their bond if they tested it. And they said, look, we've paid $100,000, $96,000. We want to get something for it. Let's just see. Let's know for sure. And if it turns out that it's false, then we'll know for sure because we've tested it in the courts. We've actually asked. And in Jersey, we didn't have to go all the way to court. We got the information from the police. So I think that's one of the lessons is trust your instincts, especially if you've been doing this for a while. If it's walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's probably a duck, and this certainly was a duck, I'll tell you that. This is not the only story, by the way. In my career, I've had 3 separate instances where I've been touched upon by absolutely fraudulent investigators. So, and I'm sure there are stories in this audience of similar occurrences. Nicole wanted to talk about, obviously independently looking at what information is available in the search jurisdiction, determine who will really be conducting the research and their credibility. We didn't know right away that the agency was involved. At first, it was run through the American Justice Institute. We knew, though, within a couple of weeks that there was this other entity because the clients told us. Not because the American Justice Institute told us, but the clients, they told us, because we demanded to meet the clients on the phone to talk to them. We wanted to have our own direct relationship with the victims as opposed to going through an intermediary. And that was eye-opening because it really showed us what was actually going on in the background, and also about it revealed the existence of Cullen and Elaine. The other thing she wanted to talk about is established payment arrangements and deliverables. We never made a payment to any of these people. It was all done by the clients directly. In fact, at one point, they made a payment without us knowing about it. We were very upset about that. We said, look, you should not be sending these people any money anymore until we test this and see if there's any credibility there. Even that was something that we felt very tentative about. But again, to some degree, if I had it to do all over again, I would have told the client, sorry, we're not going to take the case. We're going to trust our instincts. But I was definitely moved by the meeting with, and ultimately meeting face-to-face, but having conference calls with the victims. Use caution when interpreting emails and other communications. Establish the legal jurisdiction, and conduct the last point I heartily endorse. Had we stopped and talked earlier to some of our colleagues about these people, and there's always issues here because here at OffshoreAlert, there's a feeling that you can talk to your colleagues and share information without it, sort of, as the English say, Chatham House rules, where everything stays in the house and you don't have to worry about that information leaking out. But that's not always the case, and you have to always really think very hard about how much you can share, as a lawyer in particular, without violating your ethical duties. So it's tough to go around and check this information without disclosing too much. But ultimately, there are ways to do it, proper ways to do it, and that should have been done. We should, if we had asked earlier, asked around about these folks, rather than just calling it as I called it and said, I just don't believe them. I could have maybe saved the client another $16,000 and a lot of angst along the way. But it wouldn't have led to Elaine and Cullen going to jail, and Juliet having a criminal background, so I'm glad that happened. That's the story of Cullen and Elaine. It's a warning to everybody in the room that it can happen, I think, to anybody. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been an asset recovery lawyer full-time for 15 years, and I'm not in any way ashamed to stand here and say I to some degree, albeit very small, was taken in I wanted these clients to be right at some point. I really did. I was hoping that something would come back from, when we got the phone call from our friends in Jersey, and confirmed what we already thought. It was, you're like, well, kind of knew this was probably not true, but you still held out that same hope you do when you scratch that lottery ticket right before you scratch it. You're like, well, maybe there's a chance I can win this thing. You never know. Somebody's got to win it. And so we kind of thought that was going to happen, and it didn't. So to me, you have to be very careful. And the fact that, and I'm not at all picking on David when I say this, or Offshore Alert, because it's caveat emptor, and we're all adults and we're responsible for our own actions. But the fact that they were here at this conference really gave them some legitimacy to my way of thinking. They came, they were very open, they sat with us and met with us. They met with several other lawyers, and this was the American Justice Institute folks. The agency folks weren't here, obviously, because they would have been extradited to Canada if they came into the United States. So that's my side of it. There is a Canadian side. I hope when these people are released from prison, they are arrested right as they walk out of jail, just like Dan Caterina was arrested as he walked out of Alabama prison, and they're extradited to Canada to answer for the crimes they committed in Canada against Canadians. The prison, the sentencing here had to do specifically with their crimes against the American victims. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add anything from your perspective back there on your clients and how they were victimized.
Thank you, Ed. About the same time the scam was going on with Ed's client, we were retained by Corporation United States that had been defrauded of over $1 billion. And we got involved in the case about a year and a half after all the initial litigation had started in order to assist in recovery of funds from overseas accounts. And the individual that this group had hired was a retired FBI agent who was extremely credible. He was very savvy, very honest. Well, somewhere in the whole process, he had found Moneypenny and her husband. And so when I got involved, they were relating all this information they had gotten. At that point, they'd paid $130,000 to these people. And we're absolutely convinced that these were the greatest things since sliced bread. And part of the problem was with the retired FBI agent, Cullen was formerly with the Toronto Police Department. So he had credibility from that standpoint, saying, he's prior in law enforcement. And then Moneypenny had related some issues that she was actually with the Canadian government in a process that she would assist the government in finding funds that people had transferred overseas. So that was her background as part of the credibility. And Ed's statement, when I first got involved in this, and they went through some background, and I said, what kind of documents have they given you? Well, they can't show us anything. They can't show us any bank statements, but they have found bank statements and they know where the money is. Well, of course, like Ed, I thought, this doesn't smell right. There's just something wrong here. And so I pushed him. I said, in order to do anything overseas, we have to get documentation. We just can't walk in a foreign jurisdiction on the basis of somebody saying something's there. And so I said, these people need to produce something. If they don't produce it, they're just scamming you as part of the process. And so they ended up producing some bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. And as part of this process, I'd actually traced a yacht that this culprit had of 140 foot in the Caymans, and we froze that. We hired counsel there and froze the yacht, and I told him, I said, let's get the Cayman documents and we'll file this at the same time since we're going to be there doing this work anyway. And of course what happened is as soon as we mentioned this to get this structured, guess what? The money left the Cayman Islands. It's no longer there. Same issue. And guess where the money went? Monaco. And so, I kept trying to force the issue, and we finally got some bank documents from Monaco, which looked fake. And Ed and I work in the same circles, so I actually hired the same counsel that Ed did in Monaco to, because I finally said, look, let's get some proof of the pudding. Let's go in and file an action and see whether or not there's anything really there. Because part of the problem I had all the way through, the clients were so convinced that they were reputable, and I was just creating problems as part of the process. And so, of course, we got ready to file in Monaco, sent the documents to them, and about a week before we were getting ready to file, counsel called back and says, hey, I think you need to hold off just a minute because we have another issue going on here that I think is going to be relative, and that was the fact that he had filed the proceeding and found out the bank that nothing was there. One of the things that was really scary about this is that afterwards, when all this was going on, and we worked with, just like Ed, we worked with the FBI agent to assist in the criminal prosecution. But I got 5 or 6 phone calls after all this went down from attorneys throughout the United States saying, we had hired this person too, and we were giving you and Ed Davis's references the fact that these people are really reputable. And I said, why in God's name didn't you call us? You know, why didn't you call us and get some background as part of this process? And the FBI agent, I think, told me that these people had raised over $3 million in the time period they produced a scam. So not only were they creating massive problems, but, you know, I had the same kind of concerns Ed did. It just didn't sound right. It didn't smell right. You know, because you can't get these kind of things. And but the clients get so enamored, and if I'd have been at the start, I think it'd have been a different resolution. But these are issues that can occur, and you have to be very careful with them, especially from the concept. It really bothered me that somebody was using my name inappropriately because, you know, that presents an air of credibility as part of the process, and that's not appropriate. And you know, so I think in all these, as Ed said, I think the real key is to be, you know, trust your initial instincts and then really try to force the issue as part of the problem.
And really, I think to pick up on that, thank you, Chris, not allow your client, or the person who ultimately first dealt with them to drive the bus on this point. I know it's hard to do, and at some point you just say, well, fine, then go get another lawyer, do it yourself, or we're not gonna work with folks that we don't know and we haven't vetted.